Hey everyone. So, okay, this is one of those chapters where I got the vibe that despite how the events actually played out and the how the events of the chapter and the fight play out, it's not over yet. Like that's the vibe I got, is that despite how this chapter ended, I still got this feeling like this fight isn't over yet. The chapter is the literal definition of that was too easy, and even more so. That was too easy, and even more so the feeling that Izuku might have played his trump card, the second holder's quirk, a little too early. And maybe it is just me hoping there is still more to this fight, but throughout reading it, the first and foremost thing that always popped in my head with each page turn is, this is wrong. Something is seriously wrong here, and obviously not in the technical sense, but just the idea that All For One is just taking Izuku's measure throughout this chapter, or hoping he slips up and lowers his guard enough to find an opening to steal One For All. And like this chapter just gave me that very unsettling feeling that something is that All For One has one last trump card to play. Now, with that said, I do need to talk about the actual technical implications of this chapter, though, because the pacing of it was definitely fast. I'm not going to deny that, and because of that, the continued speculation of when the series, this kind of also kind of ignites my thoughts on the continued speculation of when the series is going to end, like what number the final chapter is going to be, like all that stuff. And for me personally, I like to factor in any sort of epilogue chapter or chapters the mangaka might add on top of the big final antagonist fight. So just taking that into account, I think somewhere between January and February of next year is when we should expect MHA to end, or at least that's my projection of where I'm thinking it'll end. Because even taking into account the other fights going on, I don't expect them to last more than like two chapters that the rate Horikoshi is going. So yeah, right now I'm speculating somewhere between like January and February of 2023 is when we should expect My Hero Academia to end. With all that being said, there isn't a whole lot more to talk about with this chapter, as it's a pretty straightforward battle chapter, though it was cool seeing Izuku use all the abilities of the previous One For All holders in tandem with each other, because it is in brief moments like that where we see that for however much of a power junkie he's become with all these powers, he still understands it's not about the powers but how you utilize them. And the way he uses Fajin and Black Whip to create Black Chain was definitely one of the high points of the chapter. And another high point as well is that even though I have my doubts this chapter really marks the end of the battle with All For One, one thing I do wonder is if the use of the second user's quirk transmission might have at the very least knocked a few screws loose to the point that might allow Shigaraki to take control. Like, that's like the first thing that has popped in my head of how this might play out, even though I do still believe One For All isn't out of the game yet. Like, my big thing right now is what is it that is going to knock, that is gonna allow like Shigaraki to take control of his body again. And I think transmission might have in some way helped to like further that process along. Now, with that said, I will admit this is also another chapter where the paneling definitely felt a little cramped in places. Like, it's not anything like major I can point out, but just like certain scenes, certain moments in the chapter felt like they needed more literal breathing room. And yeah, just it feels like there should have been at least a little bit more. There should have been like a different panel style used for certain moments, rather than just like the more like cramped sort of like slanted panel that we got in some of this chapter. Like, I feel that just some moments needed just like the full panel or full bottom panel kind of thing. Now, let's talk about something I kind of glanced over last week, but really didn't get too much into detail about, which is Izuku's mindset. Because despite overflowing with power, despite even briefly giving into the rage and anger, there's one thing that did ultimately pull him back from the brink, which is Shigaraki and his desire to save him. Like, that's the one thing that even now is driving him, is unrelenting the desire to save Shigaraki from All for One. It's the one thing that about Izuku that has never changed. Like the one thing he's always, from the most part, from the very beginning of the series, the one thing he's always wanted to do is save Shigaraki from himself, from the person he had become. And I'm sure there are many people who will easily draw comparisons to Naruto with his desire to save Sasuke, but in some ways, I have always thought Izuku's desire to save Shigaraki to be slightly more interesting in concept, just from the fact that they do barely know each other, and yet Izuku is still driven by that desire. And I know for some that does make the dynamic less interesting, but I think just the fact that Izuku is so driven to help Shigaraki, a person he only has a cursory understanding of, does give an avenue to really show how like pure and real Izuku's desire to be a hero is, and how just Izuku does what he does for the sole purpose of helping people. Like he really doesn't have any. He really is kind of that person where he doesn't have really any aspirations of like being rich, famous, any of that. He just wants to help people. That's who he has been this entire time, and I like how that is kind of the core of just who he is in this moment. Now, I do admit, I think there could have been, in regards to the story as a whole, I do think maybe there could have been, the story in Horikoshi could have done more to maybe address more of Izuku's, a lot more of Izuku's naivete about how the real world works, and some of the realizations he would need to face in regards to that. But it does kind of balance out by having the other holders of One for All to look to guidance. Which, again, on that note, at this point, I think we should assume that All Might is going to make it out of this whole fiasco with All for One alive, which is a little disappointing for me, as I feel having All Might die would have kind of balanced the scales on the whole thing, so to speak, of what I just talked about with Izuku needing to understand some of the dark realities of this world. But it is what it is. The other holders did kind of balance that out for him as well, but it's like, yeah, I think we can expect him to survive at this point. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and on Crunchyroll. Be sure to hit the notification bell, subscribe button, and just share it around, guys. Dark Knight of Night signing off. Later, everyone.